Morning, everybody. Valerie mentioned. Sorry? Yeah, I do. I went to all that trouble. I'm a little exhausted, frankly. So. Yeah, Valerie mentioned you paid me the compliment of asking me out here a number of times. I appreciate that. I was reflecting on that a little bit. It occurred to me this is the first time today. This is the first time that I'm going to be addressing a topic I'm actually qualified to speak to. So, hopefully that'll be a welcome change for us all. See where it goes. Yeah, I have a credential in this stuff and everything. But she said I mostly teach at Grand Valley now in master's programs in the business school. It's a long, strange story how I got there, but my background is in comparative religious studies, Buddhism and Christianity in particular. And so I still do teach 1 or 2 undergraduate courses every semester on theories of human nature, Eastern philosophy, and in some of what I'll reference, I will use undergraduates as the setup for some of the points we're going to make. Going back to the program and that little Zen short, drink tea, enjoy, peace, have a Danish. I'm glad you laughed at that. It makes me laugh every time. In some ways, it's the heart of certainly Zen Buddhism, but Buddhism in general. It's not that the quest for enlightenment, that the struggle to gain wisdom and compassion aren't serious, don't require a great deal of effort, concentration, mindfulness, etc. But earnestness can oftentimes thwart that. It's sometimes takes one off the path. And one of the things the first thing that attracted me to Buddhism, when sort of an inkling of it occurred to me as an undergraduate and then when I was in India, is that I would go and visit these Dharma centers or monasteries or whatever it was where these nominal Buddhists were practicing, and they really seemed to be having a good time. I mean, there was a sense of irony and joy and laughter, and coming from, not to offend anybody, coming from the Presbyterian Church, this was new. So, there were a lot of lovely people, but there was just, again, this kind of earnestness to it. And so I used that. We're talking about human nature, and I used that little Zen humor line with my undergraduates. And I said, well, a lot of you probably have church background, let's just do it together the way we would. And thinking that when we got to the Danish part, we'd all have a laugh, loosen up, and then do what the Buddhists suggest, which is it's very hard to approach the teachings of Buddhism directly. You want to have what they sometimes call a soft mind. Let things come in a little bit sideways, relax a little bit. But they, of course, being well-trained, it's not their fault, being well-trained to take Michigan tests of one kind or another, took it very earnestly, very seriously, and they got to the last line and said Danish, Then I could just see them, kind of a blank look. Said, all right, now, should I write that down? Is Danish some part of what's going to be happening? It's important for us to remember. So it took a little while to break that down. But the sense of humor, the sense of sort of deeply informed joy that they had was very attractive to me. I'm up in the Himalayas the very first time, up in northern India, in Ladakh, and people treating me so well and being so genuinely interested in who I was and why I was there, and seemed to be enjoying themselves. It's not that they're perfect by any sense, but there is a kind of one of the translations for Bodhisattva, which is a Sanskrit word meaning great being, that's used more often in Asia, actually. The translation is a cheerful spiritual friend. And there was a lot of that going on. And so the road to enlightenment intrigued me. How did these people get to be this way? And I took lots of various courses to try to figure that out, and haven't. But I'll give you one story that maybe illustrates it. Many years ago, after I'd already started reading about this stuff and trying to practice some, I had to go to New York for some reason. So I got on a plane, and through some fortunate karmic ripening, I sat right next to, I was one of the last people on the plane. I hate sitting on planes. So I'm climbing over this guy in robes, and it turns out to be Gelug Rinpoche, and Gelug Rinpoche is now in his 80s. He came out of India with the Dalai Lama, fled Tibet into India in 1959, had a Dharma center, a monastery in southern India, a couple of well-placed Ann Arborites came along, plucked him from obscurity in southern India, and the Jewel Heart Dharma Center in Ann Arbor has branches in Chicago and Cleveland, the Netherlands. He's a very funny guy, very, very deep knowledge, a lot of wisdom, real pleasure to be around. So I used to go back and forth some. So I knew who he was. And I'd studied Tibetan, so in my very best Tibetan, after the plane was up, I'd give him a little time to settle in, right? I said, here's who I am, I know who you are, it's a pleasure to be sitting next to you, so what about this enlightenment business, Something brilliant along those lines. And he, these guys can only be compassionate up to a point, responded in English because there was no way he was going to suffer my Tibetan all the way to New York City. And we had this very pleasant conversation in English on the way to New York. And we're talking, like I said, he didn't know me. I'd been and listened to him talk a couple times, but he didn't know who I was. And we get into this conversation about, the Buddhist path and what's it for and purpose and all that sort of thing. And at one point I did ask him, about, so this enlightenment thing, right? And he started to giggle a little bit and smile. And he talked a little bit about his life in India, and then he said, and he starts really laughing at this point, and people around us starting to laugh, and nobody knows why. We're all kind of laughing. It's just very infectious, who this guy is. He says, I can't go back to Tibet. You know that, right? It's like, it's just more and more like this is the worst tragedy that's ever happened to this guy. He cannot go back to his homeland. It's been decimated by the Chinese. And he's just laughing. People around us are laughing. It's like, do you know what it says on my passport? So I said, no. he says, there's a living Buddha. Living Buddha. They think I'm a living Buddha. That's why I can't go back to Tibet or China, because I'm a living Buddha. These tears are rolling down. He's laughing, slapping all of us around. We're just, laughing. But there's a part of me in the midst of all this laughter and gaiety and, joy about this guy who's laughing about the worst tragedy that's ever happened to in his whole life. That's thinking, because I know it's just enough to be dangerous, but that's what the teachings say. Wait a minute, somebody in your position is a living Buddha. The students are at least supposed to think of you as a living Buddha. I mean, aren't you enlightened? Aren't you a Buddha? That's not the point. I didn't say that at the moment. I let the laughter die down. Everybody went back to their books or whatever. But I did kind of raise that. I said, so what's, what is your status? I mean, how do you think of yourself? And I don't know, he must have thought that, most of my graduate education had been wasted on me. He said, look, I don't really know about enlightenment. I suspect there's something along the lines of enlightenment that these other Buddhists have talked about. I certainly hope there is. Sounds like a great thing. He said, I'll tell you what I do know. He said, I know a little bit about kindness. He said, I think you can be kind. And I think there are ways to develop kindness and be kind to one another. And I thought, make a note to self, try to be kind. But that, in a way, it would have been easy for him to say that, right, on this plane. He gets off. I show up in Ann Arbor once or twice again. No big deal, right? And I get this little sort of upaya, skillful means, words of wisdom from this person I think of as a really significant Buddhist teacher. But that wasn't the point at all. We got off the plane, right? And I go to get my bag, and he looks at me. He says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm staying somewhere down in the 30s, and just here for work, blah blah." He said, "Oh," I said, "I'll give you a ride." And he was going way, way uptown. And if you know New York, right, I mean, depending on the time of day, it's way out of your way to do that. And he does, and we pick up a couple of other people who know him, and we're having this nice time, this conversation, and he's way out of his way, paying me complete, full attention the whole time. It's perfectly pleasant. Drops me off at my hotel, and then, God knows how many other people they've stopped and helped, between then and the time he got to where he was going. And you could easily object, well, look, DeWilde, that's hardly particularly Buddhist, right? A lot of people are kind in that particular way. And I wouldn't argue with you at all. In my experience, paying attention to this kind of stuff for the last 35 years or so, regularly, Buddhists, if I'm in a Buddhist country or I'm around Buddhists, That kind of expression, kindness, attention, is paid more regularly with less affectation and with fewer expectations than any other group of people that however they define, describe, or align themselves, in my experience, right? I think I can be, my wife and daughters are here, you can ask them. I'm a little nervous about my daughter being here, quite frankly, because they've never heard me speak publicly, and I expect them to be my harshest critics when this is all said and done. I think I can do kind acts, perform kind acts on occasion. I think I can get my mind around to occasionally act in a way that I think outwardly kind people act. But Gela Rinpoche and many of certainly the Tibetans and other masters that I've been around, have had the privilege to study with, they are kindness, right? And it's a huge difference, at least in my experience, between acting in a kind way. I have to start somewhere, right? I don't mind starting there. but starting there and then being kindness, compassion, the kinds of folks that these people, the kinds of qualities that people regularly exhibit. So I'm very intrigued by all that and haven't stopped my practice or my reading or my teaching. I'm a bad Buddhist in the sense that, do I meditate every day? No. Do I uphold every single one of the vows? No, not necessarily. But there is something in their prescription and description of the world that's very compelling to me, as shown by the example. So, slight detour. I was raised to be a Christian theologian. I went after graduate school to become a Christian theologian. They fairly readily and quickly educated me right out of becoming a Christian theologian. I said, wow. And I was just shocked. It was my naivety at the time. I was in my early 20s. The number of people who were going on into the ministry who had no faith whatsoever. I'm sure there's a handful of Buddhists like that too, but nonetheless. And then I was sort of adrift. What's the meaning? What's the purpose? Where do you go from here? And I had still a small voice in my head said, why don't you go to India? And don't worry, I don't listen to every single small, still voice that comes into my head. I did pay attention to that one, went to India, ended up in Himalayas, getting in touch with these Tibetan Buddhists or Tibetan informed Buddhists, which changed pretty much everything, and came back and tried different variations of Buddhism. The Vipassana, the oldest or mainstream Buddhism, very strong, heavy emphasis on developing a meditation practice. It's kind of boot camp for Buddhists in a way. At least that was back then at the very Center for Buddhist Studies out in Western Massachusetts. I tell many of my students get interested in Buddhism for one reason or another. It seems really cool, or they're interested in some girl who's seems to be interested in Buddhism or whatever the reason might be. But some of them they come to the house and we'll sit and we'll meditate and they'll ask me questions. I'll say it's fine to learn from me and that's good. But at some point you got to test yourself a little bit. And I'll suggest they go off to one of these 3-day retreats that the Insight Meditation Center puts on. And it's really a way to kind of separate, to test yourself to see if you're sincere about this or not, because you get there, it's a little bit better than it used to be, but in the old days, no, I can say that now. In the old days, it really was, you got up at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, right? And you didn't eat. And you went and you sat, and the teacher often has not forgot that breakfast was one of the meals of the day, right? And you walked, walking meditation, or you sitting meditation, 16 hours a day. You could speak for half an hour a day. No, actually, the teacher could speak for half an hour a day. You could listen for half an hour a day. The food was terrible. There was no chocolate to be found, anywhere. But it was a great, great sort of introduction to the tradition itself. Though, if you're inspired by this to try and do it, one of the things you need to know about Western Massachusetts is that in late May, early June, the black flies are in season. So you go to this place and you take a vow, right? Not to kill anything, not to lie, cheat, steal, do anything like that while you were there. And you do walking meditation outside. I vow not to kill anything. I'm perfectly mindful, perfectly present. Well, the black flies know about the Buddhists. So you can almost hear the Wagner come here, right? So you're over there, you take the girl in the robes, I'll take the tall guy, So off they go, and so you come back, and this one poor woman came back in for the city meditation. She had worn white pants to do her walking meditation. She came back and there was this Rorschach test, basically. And the habit of killing sometimes trumps whatever intent you might have. And she looked at us all like maybe this Buddhism thing was not for her. I don't know. Anyway, that was great training. I'm glad I did it. And then I joined a Zen martial arts temple for a couple of years when I was living in Boston, which was terrific too. But in both of those traditions, there's a kind of austerity to it and very hierarchical in terms of the teacher and all that kinds of thing. And the food is just not very good. I was not by nature or commitment a vegetarian, but that's what the deal was. And then I started graduate school, and on the way home one summer, I thought, well, there's this 8-day retreat on coming to terms with your own death, sort of enlightenment and death in the Tibetan tradition. And I'd never done a full-out retreat in the Tibetan tradition before, so I made arrangements. I stopped. It was up in Ithaca, very rustic, and I was kind of steeling myself. Right? Well, here we go again. You'll be hungry and you'll be cold, but this is good for you. All that kind of thing. And the bugs will eat you alive. But people were milling about, and they were talking. That was new to me that anybody would talk at a retreat. And we had lunch, and the food was really pretty good. And then they brought out brownies. And I thought to myself, I think I have found the Buddhist tradition. And we played volleyball, and it was swell. But we worked very hard those 8 days, and it culminated in, and I'm from a rationalist philosophical tradition, but it culminated in an experience in which they used various Sanskrit symbols. And you would visualize those. Tibetan Buddhism is very big on visualization practice. And at some point you would identify, there's a lot of identification with those particular symbols in terms of various psychic and other energies or qualities of your own. And you would be encouraged to think of yourself as this symbol and what that symbol represented. And then you go from what that energy is in its what they call gross state to its subtle or extremely subtle state, which is on your way to transforming it from a negative to a positive emotion or quality or psychological energy. And the point of this finally hit the 8th day is to culminate in the visualization of your own death, which when I started the practice that week thought, A, I'm not sure why I'm doing that, or B, I'm not sure why I want to do that. But the point, of course, is that, and Leslie said this earlier this morning in the group, is that it's something that all of the traditions have known well. I mean, if you travel through Europe, right, if you go to a monastery, they still got the skulls, I mean, you walked in the presence of death pretty much all the time in your particular tradition because it was very important to understand and act on whatever your spiritual path was all the time. Gaelic Rinpoche has a saying that Buddhists don't go to lunch. It's not what he means. It's not that we don't eat. There isn't time not to be paying attention. There isn't time not to be cultivating this path of mindfulness. And so I actually had that experience. It is possible, I'm here to tell you. And it changed everything. People notice dramatic changes in me or anything. But in terms of the anxiety about death, right, I can't say that I've ever experienced that in the same way I did before this particular experience. And so I've been intrigued all the way along. So how do you develop yourself, to be one of these people who seem less anxious, less full of dread, calmer, more at peace, etc. The key, I think, on a daily basis is something called bare attention. And so since we're running out of time, I warned the people who came early this morning, if you'd mind trying this with me in the spirit of spiritual practice, anthropology, there's nothing else to do, why not? So it's called bare attention, right? You just want to get yourself, obviously you don't have to do this, but really, why not? In a comfortable position in your chair, with your feet about shoulder width apart. And when I ask my students, again, the undergraduate student said, do any of you ever feel any anxiety? They look at me like I'm an idiot. I'm feeling anxiety just in you asking me that question, right? So I don't know, your concerns and what the things you're anxious about may be a little different than theirs. They're all 20 and 21. Some of you look like you're well into your 30s, so probably different than that. But the point of bare attention is to pay attention moment to moment. Some of you have this practice already, I'm sure, to what is actually the case, rather than running our usual stories about what is the case. So, for example, and to think that anxiety is not something that has some independent existence, which has visited you, right, solely to afflict you in some way, but rather that it's possible to hold it, see it for what it is, its constituent parts, the ways that we contribute to our own anxiety. And by paying really careful, bare attention to it, begin to alleviate that practice. And I'll give you the most extreme story just to help make the point. Zen master in Tokyo, I wasn't there, this is secondhand. He goes in to see the doctor, something's going wrong with his arm. And doctor diagnoses, yeah, I'm sorry, you've got a skin cancer with your arm, we're going to have to cut that off. He said, no, he said, I kind of want to try this a different way. Well, it's going to get really brown, it's going to get rancid, it's going to be really painful, I mean, really bad things are going to happen, we should let us cut this. No, thanks. Goes back to his Dharma center, and just his meditation practice for the next 6 months becomes full, bare attention to his arm. It is painful. It does get brown, right? He's suffering, no doubt about it. And every day and every moment, he's just paying bare attention to that arm. And about 6 months, it starts to clear up. In 9 months, it's gone. Don't try this at home unless you're a Zen master, by the way. He goes back to the doctor, says, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. This is incredible. How does it sound? He said, he just looked at the doctor, he said, well, it's been my experience that nothing can withstand that kind of attention. My own experience is not that dramatic, but, and I tell my students too, so I'm meditating and paying bare attention, and gee, Professor, well, my appendix seems to have burst. It's like, well, just go deep into that experience and just, no, we're going to call a doctor and get you right. But for cramps and all that kind of thing, it works. The bigger point for the Buddhists, of course, is the psychological, the emotional. So visualize, if you can, anxiety, your particular form of anxiety, whatever that feels, looks like to you. And rather than running the usual stories that we do, which is, a donut will fix this anxiety, or a conversation with somebody I'm close to will fix that. The whole point of bare attention is, with non-judgmental, complete attention, is to acknowledge it just as it is. Boy, that's what anxiety feels like. That's what it looks like. This is what it's doing to me. I wonder how this arises. To get curious about it, to investigate it, to feel it as deeply as possible. So let's just do that for a minute, and then we'll come back. So to get to the actual title of the talk, "Oh, You Stupid Monk," and wrap this up for the sake of your morning, what does the Buddha think that we're stupid about? Well, it turns out to be any number of things if you read through the sutras. It also always makes me wonder, right? Jesus, Socrates, Buddha, it's like, you get closer to these guys, the dumber they think you are. But there's a sense in which what we're dumb about, what we're stupid about, is the way things really are in ourselves, right? I'm the sort of person who's anxious. No, you're not, right? Anxiousness is something that is amenable to kind of bare attention, can be understood as constitutive parts and causes and conditions. It's not something that has some essential ingredient that just happened to attack you. The promise of this activity is that the longer you do it, the better you do it, the more you do it with a teacher, the more it proves itself to alleviate those things that cause us suffering, and through our own suffering, the way we cause suffering to others as well. So at some point, if you're on the Buddhist path, you say, well, am I committed to this, alleviating my suffering, understanding it, and then developing the path of compassion and wisdom to help other folks? If so, I might want to take something like the Bodhisattva vow. before you do that, just one piece of warning. So the Bodhisattva that was to be Avalokiteshvara, the 1,000-armed Bodhisattva, walking along one day, gets inspired by teaching of the Buddha and says, yes, I too shall become a Buddha. I too shall stick around to alleviate my suffering and the suffering of all sentient beings. Walks along, dawns on him what he's just committed to, and explodes into about 1 million pieces. And depending on the version of the story you read, it takes Shiva and Vishnu and any number of Hindu gods to come along, takes a look at it, they see this mess, they go, oh, somebody else took the Bodhisattva vows. Why are we left cleaning this up? Why does everybody believe in us? What happens with Buddhism? They put them back together and said, look, if you're going to do this, then you're going to need some help. And they give them 1,000 arms, and lots of eyes and heads and all that stuff. But here it is, in short, we'll end with this. Beings are numberless, I vow to save them. Desires are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable, I vow to become it. When we take these vows, an intention is created, the seed of an effort to follow through. Because these vows are so vast, they are in a sense undefinable. We continually define and redefine them as we renew our intention to fulfill them. If you have a well-defined task with a beginning, middle, and end, you can estimate or measure the effort needed, but the Bodhisattva vows are immeasurable. The intention we arouse, the effort we cultivate when we call forth these vows, extends us beyond the limits of our personal identities. So, that is my call to become beyond the stupid monk, myself, in following and trying to emulate some of the Buddhist teachers who have inspired me and who have not only shown me death, but shown me what's possible in terms of living life. So, thank you for listening.